Thank you all for joining us on this Zoom. NFWL is excited to be partnering with PhRMA to bring you this critical information in these, and I hate this term, but there's no other way to put it, unprecedented times. We are coming together to achieve one shared goal, and that's to beat COVID-19. The decades-long investments PhRMA has made in the new technology and research and treatments have prepared them to act swiftly. And for those of you who don't know, my husband's a physician, I'm a first responder. So, this is particularly exciting for me to learn a little bit more. My husband sits and watches almost every waking moment, different seminars. So it's good to, now I can actually tell him what I've learned. So, if you let me welcome Scott Laganga, who serves as Senior Vice President of State Advocacy at PhRMA. In this role, he oversees state-based teams responsible for government affairs, public policy, and the future of medicine. Scott and his colleagues have developed an excellent and executed campaigns to ensure that states are well positioned to support biopharmaceutical innovation. Then we'll hear from Priscilla Van der Veer, a Vice President of Public Affairs at PhRMA. No offense, Scott, girl power. Priscilla leads the development and execution of communication strategies and activities for the organization at key federal, state, and international issues and advocacy priorities. And to round out our session today, let me also welcome Dr. L.J. Tan. Prior to joining the Immunization Action Coalition, where he currently serves as the Chief Strategy Officer, Dr. Tan was the Director of Medicine and Public Health at the American Medical Association. He also served as the AMA's Director of Infectious Disease, Immunology, and Molecular Medicine. He was a voting member of the Department of Health and Human Services National Vaccine Advisory Committee and the AMA's liaison to CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. My husband watches lots of your videos. Anyway, let me turn this over to Scott and we'll get started. I'm looking forward to learning more about all of your work. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll have Brenna run through them at the end. Thank you. Scott?
Perfect. Well, thank you, Assemblywoman Damaso. And trust me, I am not offended by girl power. My wife and my daughter would say the same thing to me and I would fully support it. So it's an absolute pleasure to be with you all. Really do appreciate the opportunity. I also, Assemblywoman, I am a proud New Jerseyan. Born and raised, although I am supposedly the black sheep now by my mother's account because I was the one that moved away and came to Washington, D.C. But my roots still are strong and my entire family is still back there. So this industry, as you can imagine, very well tied to its New Jersey roots, and living in the medicine chest of the medicine chest meant a lot to me growing up and still does. So I really do appreciate the opportunity. I think we have a great chance to sort of talk about where the industry began and the progress that's been made, certainly in the fight against COVID-19. I know we have some slides, so we pull those up and really to be able to sort of chat through what this all looks like and what the promise looks like for the future as well. So if you go to the next slide, what we sort of highlight to begin with is first, let me take this step back to 2020. I mean, most of us want to forget about it, but it's important to sort of remember where we came from and why we were in this position. As you all remember, last March with the WHO declaring COVID-19 a pandemic, the medical toolbox, honestly, for treating infected patients was pretty weak, modest at best, when it involved mostly oxygen and ventilation, and everyone was sort of looking what would be the opportunity and the need for something much more comprehensive and also as well targeted in scope. Today, we now have these multiple therapies to treat COVID-19 patients because of that industry innovation. And this really is a great story here in the United States, especially. There's a number of them in this space. There's different types, right? There's antivirals, of remdesivir from Gilead, the anti-inflammatories, baricitinib, which is the Lilly drug in combination with remdesivir. These category of JAK inhibitors, we basically have learned from other products for other treatment areas, HIV/AIDS, rheumatoid arthritis, how immunology, and Dr. Tan can attest to this and speak to it more, but what did we have on the shelf that could then be brought to the table very quickly? Because we all know that time was of the essence at the time. Monoclonal antibodies, you can think pretty much these are therapies almost like the immune system in a bottle. We now have multiple MABs, as they're called, from a variety of different treatment challenges, looking at products from Lilly and Regeneron and others. And we, of course, everyone has become an expert, rightfully so, based on the needs around vaccines and vaccine candidates, thanks to multiple of them now authorized for use around in the US and around the world. And this really is about a tremendous advancements in record time. No corners cut. We always talk about that because it's really important, especially when we talk about vaccine hesitancy. My colleague Priscilla will do in a moment. But now products from Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, outstanding efficacy. And we all know there's additional vaccine candidates nearing the finish line, which is not going to just be important for the US, but is also important for the globe. When we talk about how do we get out of this long term, we need as many shots on goal as possible for particularly a global scale. Unfortunately, we've lost way too many to this pandemic in just that year's time. And so I am so grateful the modern medical miracle in this regard. This builds on years of prior research and development, right? And that's taken place, really is a credit to the hundreds of thousands of researchers around the world who would make this a reality today. It also is about developing a new class of medicines under normal circumstances. This is normally extremely challenging. To do this in the middle of a pandemic is actually quite remarkable. It really is. And had it not been for that strong R&D leading up to the pandemic, as well as the policy environment, this really does matter. And obviously this is my job, but I mean it honestly. Without a strong state and federal policy environment to foster this kind of innovation, there's a reason it happened here in the United States right out of the gate and first. If you go to the next slide. So we've learned, and what so many, going from layman's to experts around the globe, that this last year is the general public gained a much greater expertise in understanding the complexity of drug discovery. So much is dependent on a robust and diverse clinical trial environment. There are currently over 1,800 clinical trials underway in the area of COVID vaccines and treatments. And with a great deal in terms of here in the United States, there's 36 clinical trials testing vaccine candidates, as well as close to 400 investigating therapeutics well across the country, nearly every state, as well as the District of Columbia. And as the world now knows, these trials are really key to identifying the treatment options for patients. They're also key as we think about those populations. We all know that right now, children yet to have a vaccine option. We have different categories in that regard that are going to be really important as we talk about getting to a place of herd immunity. We know that we're going to have to piece together all the various forms in order to get to that place. And so it's very important that this clinical trial work continue in order to get to that long-term goal. You go to the next slide. I know Priscilla and Dr. Tan will discuss this more at length, but it's important to emphasize safety and efficacy of the vaccines is really this priority for the industry. As I said before, no shortcuts taken in the development of these treatments. COVID-19 vaccine candidates had to meet the same standards for clinical trials as other vaccines. And so including testing in very large phase 3 clinical trials, these were 30,000 plus in participants, enormous scale and size, in order to really make sure that they had good data and could transfer that in terms of what a product could be submitted to the FDA for an emergency use authorization. Our companies have been committed to that FDA's gold standard review requirements. And in fact, they even went one step further. Many of those companies, they all pledged not to even submit to the FDA until their phase 3 data was complete, which was really about affirming their position to ensure that these products were safe, efficacious, and that the public, knowing that hesitancy would be key, would feel that level of confidence necessary as we move forward. Our companies welcomed that additional guidance from the FDA as well to really make sure that that was put into place early. And now they've also taken this sort of unprecedented step as manufacturers to share the vaccine clinical trial protocols and trial recruiting updates in as close to real time as possible. This is not only in addition to sharing data with federal regulators as part of the trial process, but has really been magnified when we think about manufacturers have also been sharing the data with each other. This level of collaboration, not just as manufacturers and competitors as they are, but also public institutions and academia, was so key, as we know, with this rapid timeline that we are operating under. Now, vaccine safety continues to be monitored through the FDA's emergency use authorization, and our companies will work after approval to closely coordinate with the FDA and CDC for adverse events that may result from a drug. So if there's something that's detected, they immediately can address the safety issues and improve the profile of the drug if needed. This is clearly an area in the news right now and shows that the system is working well on behalf of patients in order to figure out to make the necessary steps and adjustments for usage in the future. Go to the next slide. Now, our work didn't start with COVID. There was a long history of this industry prior to COVID, and it's certainly not going to end with COVID either. We really are at this cutting edge of a new era of medicine. This includes recently approved medicines that are saving and improving lives in a way that is just sort of unprecedented. So now we can actually reverse blindness in kids with a rare genetic retinal disorder. We can cure spinal muscular atrophy, a costly and fatal disease. You're all well aware of the advancements we've seen in oncology and cancer through personalized cancer treatments. Something very important to me is it's an item important within my family now through the use of CAR T therapies. We have a new class of migraine medicines that can drastically improve patients' quality of life. This was sort of debilitating for patients based on the scale of migraine and what that meant in terms of the way in which they could go about their lives with their family or in the work environment. And there's also potential curative therapies on the horizon for terrible diseases, sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, the list goes on. This really is the sort of benefit is what we're seeing to this transforming patient care. Now, it's essential as we look to the future that we can rely on sort of state legislators like yourself and others to continue to promote innovation through good policy and incentivizing and rewarding the risky and expensive work, honestly, that our industry does. This will help us to continue to thrive and bring treatments to market for the country and to the world in the event of the future pandemics. I mean, I hate to say that we're already planning and preparing for the next one, but we need to. And that's what this pandemic certainly told us. But not to mention treating the many chronic disease and conditions that are out there right now and that patients continue to suffer with day after day. And this has been really important in the midst of the pandemic about making sure that we're helping patients who need it in light of the fact that many of these have been facing these challenges even as the pandemic went on. So if you go to the next slide, what we do know as an industry is that cures and treatments we discover, they only matter if they're accessible and affordable for the families who need them. Innovation, candidly, it only works if an innovation can be accessed. And we all know from the past year that this pandemic has caused economic stress for so many. From job loss, business shutdown, many people in our communities that really are struggling financially right now. And we view it as our industry has a responsibility to step up. So many of our companies have expanded their assistance programs to help more people. The Medicine Assistance Tool, as you see here, is a web platform designed to help patients, caregivers, and healthcare providers learn more about some of the resources available to assist in affording medicines. And I would suggest that for any of you as an elected official, this is a great tool for a go-to for the constituents that you serve when those questions do arise, as they will, about patient affordability and access. But honestly, there's only so much that can be done by just tools like this. We agree that for too many Americans, the health system is really not working and needs to be changed and adjusted for the future. While medical innovation has made the US this world leader, as we saw from the pandemic, the treatments just don't benefit patients who can't get them. So as we know, there are no easy solutions. Patients need real leadership from everyone involved in our healthcare system. That's why our companies are actually calling on everyone in the healthcare system to join in support of what common sense reforms to make to insurance. So it works like insurance and ensures that patients can afford the medicines that doctors prescribe, I should say. If you go to the next slide, in the States, we specifically as an industry have been putting forward a real proactive agenda to help patients. This is I put this as a simple premise: make insurance work like insurance again. So to begin with, as you see on the left, sharing discounts and rebates. You probably all have heard of these, but on average, pharmaceutical companies rebate 40%. I'll say it again, 40% of the medicine's list price back to insurance companies and PBMs. Now, these rebates, unfortunately, are not reaching the patients at the pharmacy counter, and they should, because ultimately, patients are the ones then bearing those costs, and it's the biggest reason they probably complain to all of you about why their drug costs are out of control, and they'd be right in that regard. West Virginia just unanimously passed this reform, and Governor Justice signed it into law, and legislators in states ranging from South Carolina, Michigan, New York, and others are considering similar legislation to this top. This is important to changing the fundamental system and how it operates, with the goal of making sure that we are lowering the amount that patients are paying out of pocket, because that's what voters and across the country really do care about. That's their driving issue. The next area is making coupons count towards deductibles and other cost sharing burdens. Today, in some cases, health insurance companies are not allowing the coupons that manufacturers provide to patients to count towards the deductible or other cost sharing challenges. Now, patients could be paying thousands more at the pharmacy than they should be. We need to end this practice, and we're making progress in a number of states. Just recently, Kentucky legislature passed an accumulator adjustment ban with overwhelming bipartisan support. And legislation is currently pending in states from Arkansas, Connecticut, Michigan, Ohio, Oklahoma, among others, with immense support from the patient advocacy community driving this change. And this builds on the 5 states since 2019 that had already enacted accumulator adjustment program bans and put them in place to help patients. Lastly, giving patients more predictable cost sharing and covering medicines from day one and capping patient out of pocket is really key. Actual spending on medicines is growing at the slowest rate in years. All the data is out there to prove this. The unfortunate part is it doesn't feel that way for patients, and there's a reason why. Because insurers and others are increasingly using high deductibles, co-insurance, formulary tiers. We're all facing it. It doesn't matter where you sit and what role you have in your private insurance, you are feeling greater out-of-pocket costs associated than you did prior. And that is where that ire and anger certainly should come from a patient. And so these kinds of tiering and all these challenges to patients, this is all despite evidence that high cost sharing can lead patients to what we know to do: ration medicines or failing to get their prescriptions altogether. And that's a problem. Medication adherence is something we really need to be focused on. Now, every state should require insurers to offer at least some plan options, not a requirement for all things, that exclude medicines from the deductible, cover medicines from day one of coverage, or even limit the amount of a patient pays out of pocket for a 30-day supply of a single prescription. These are sort of common sense, basic, and get back to insurance for the benefit of those who need it. And that's where many of us believe there can be significant changes done. And the states are usually, are often, if not exclusively, the leaders on getting many of these policies done across the country. So with that, I'm going to transition over and hand over my colleague, Priscilla. She'll talk more about that building on the confidence in vaccines and our efforts on that front. And I look forward to the opportunity for discussion and questions. So Priscilla, turn to you.
Thank you, Scott. And we can go to the next slide. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to turn it back to talking about vaccine confidence and just sort of show where the progress stands today when it comes to where people and the general public is at with vaccine hesitancy. So, the progress from last year. So when we first started looking at this question of, will you get vaccinated as soon as a vaccine is available? How long will you wait? Those types of things. We saw much higher numbers of people saying, no, maybe not. I might wait and see. I'm not sure. And those numbers have dropped precipitously as more people have actually received a shot. As we saw over the weekend, 50% of adult Americans have received at least one shot. You've got people who want to get vaccinated ASAP, and you still have some folks in the wait and see category, but those only if required and definitely not categories have shrunk significantly. Now you look at this and there are a couple of groups that remain pretty highly concerned, and they run the gamut. So you've got Black adults as well as rural residents who tend to be a little bit higher up. And I think certain essential non-health workers and also Republicans have increased in their hesitancy about getting a vaccine, or have not reduced. Perhaps they haven't increased, but their numbers haven't reduced. Again, these numbers are better than they were even in January, and we continue to see them tick up. These numbers are from March on the screen that you're seeing. So my guess is as more and more people have gotten vaccinated over the last month, my guess is these numbers have actually gotten even higher, particularly the number of people who have already received a dose. So we can go to the next slide. So what does this mean as far as your legislators? You're talking to your constituents all the time. You're getting questions. There's a lot of bad information outside. So, I think some of the perceptions that we're seeing is that for a lot of people who continue to be in that wait and see mindset, there are safety questions that create a lack of confidence. And that sort of centers around these three primary themes. Speed, they feel like the process was rushed. We are worried about corners being cut. If it was that fast, how can it be safe? The novelty of it, COVID is really only a little over a year old, COVID-19 anyway. How can we even have a good vaccine when we don't even know everything there is to know about the disease itself? And then side effects, we can't know what the longer term studies are going to show about potential side effects, and what does that mean? I think the most worrying for folks, and the thing that causes them the most anxiety, is this idea about side effects, the unknown and the unknowable, the perception of a rushed process. And what we have found, so we've done a significant amount of message testing where we go and we do focus groups and we talk to people to get their perspectives. We also do polling to see how people respond to certain messages. What we have found, and we've talked about this with public health officials, with physicians and others, is that if we can continue to focus on these key themes around the number of lives that are saved by vaccines, the scope and the rigor of the clinical trials, the technology advances, and the fact that this was not a rushed process. We need to explain the speed and why it was able to happen so quickly, but making clear that even though it did happen so quickly, corners were not cut on safety and on rigor. And so we're continuing to, really hone these and get these messages out. But, you are all a critical audience to hearing these. So we can go ahead to the next slide, and I'll dig in a little bit more. So, one of the things that I'm a big vaccine proponent, but one of the things that we regularly remind people of is that vaccines reinforce, they save lives, and we need to reinforce that. They are the second most important public health intervention besides clean water in the history of humanity. They are the reason why we no longer have smallpox. They are the reason why we no longer have polio in the United States. There's a reason why we have such low rates of measles. These are why fewer children die. They're why fewer adults die. Smallpox killed more people than all wars combined in human history. It was a scourge on society, and the only thing that ended it and eliminated it from the earth was vaccination. The other thing is we know a lot about vaccines. We've done a lot of work on vaccines over centuries, and the process that we used to develop COVID-19 vaccines were the same processes that we use to develop all other vaccines. The difference came in the streamlining that we have been able to achieve through technological advancements, the advances in science that have occurred over the last 10 years, and the investments we've made to be able to do this vaccine development at the scale we were able to do it. So for example, when we were looking at vaccines against SARS back in the early 2000s, but what we found, what had to happen then was you had to go and you had to individually test each potential vaccine candidate one by one. Today, we can do thousands of vaccine candidates at a time to see if there's any reaction between that and the virus itself. And Dr. Tan could talk about this much better than I can. I am not a scientist, but he is, and he can speak to this, but these technological advances have allowed us to move really quickly, but they meant we are not cutting corners. The massive scope of clinical trials, tens of thousands of Americans from all walks of life. These trials had 30, 40,000 people in them to really test and rigorously test them. And it was for patients like you, including your at-risk parents, including people who had other conditions, including people from different ethnicities and different races. And when you're able to tell people that people just like them in your community have also gotten vaccinated, that is reassuring to them. So people are really, and the most important thing is that most people are really looking to their personal medical professionals and experts for science-based advice. So what does that look like, and how do we drive that? And that's your doctor, but it's also your church. It's also public health officials, but it's also you. It's also elected officials who they trust and see and hear from in their community. And then finally, and we can go, I think this is a key one about speed. If rushed is our greatest challenge, we have to educate folks on the process, and you don't have to be super knowledgeable about this, but people really do crave concrete, direct, trustworthy information. I think we all are concerned about, quote, fake news and bad information out there. And so all of you can really play a role in delivering information that concrete, is direct, is honest. You can drive people to, credible sources for information. And the fact that, again, the speed happened because we were able to streamline the process. We were able to do gene sequencing, which we didn't have previously, to be able to sequence the COVID-19 genome within weeks, whereas in the past that took months. And we could do that in weeks now. And that the result of these vaccines was a massive collaboration between our industry, between government, between academic medical centers, between all of these different components, both here in the United States and around the world. The one thing I wanted to speak to really quickly, and I'm sure this will come up, and if folks have questions about it, but obviously there was an announcement last week about the J&J vaccine and the pausing of that. This is actually a great example of how the process is supposed to work, because the reason why it was paused is we're keeping patient safety and well-being in the forefront. They're reviewing the data from just 6 reported cases of a rare clotting disorder. There were more than 7 million doses administered of the J&J vaccine. So that's 6 people out of 7 million. And so out of an abundance of caution, they decided to pause. They've convened a meeting with folks at the CDC and the advisory committee on immunization practices to review those cases. And they want to review the analysis. They want to investigate. And again, this is the process working. And our industry has put safety and well-being of patients. That is our #1 priority. We don't want any shortcuts taken. It is not in our interest or anyone else's interest that unsafe products are out there. And so we want to make sure that this thorough, very clear review is being done. And our companies are going to continue to work around the clock with health authorities, with others, to communicate in an open and ongoing fashion. And this is really just important to reemphasize that this is the progress, the program and the protocols working exactly like they should. So what does that mean as you engage audiences? So we can go to the next slide. So when it comes to engaging with communities of color, they want to hear broad, inclusive messaging, that visible inclusion of people of color who are medical and scientific experts, who are directly from those communities. We have to acknowledge the past disparities, and we have to speak to transparency moving forward, the importance of oversight in clinical trials and accountability. We need to show that institutions need to show engaged success as long-term, and we need to be held accountable for that, and make sure that these communities are being communicated to in a way that is very real to them, and play the role of information resource. That this is, again, this goes back to what we saw quite a bit of in some of our research. Is it goes back to churches, it goes back to physicians and nurses and others in the Black and Brown community who can speak directly to these issues. Now there's the other side, where we've seen a real hesitancy among certain conservative audiences, particularly men, particularly rural conservative audiences. And so when speaking to them, it's all about localized community messaging. Doctors and national experts, so folks like Dr. Fauci and the CDC, are not credible to this audience. But Donald Trump is out there talking about getting vaccinated. As a message, we need to focus on the fact that he has been vaccinated. He's out there encouraging others to get vaccinated. He played a role in the development of these vaccines, and that's a very important message for this audience. And it's a way to restore personal freedoms. It allows you to get back to vacation, to church, to sports, to restaurants, to all the things that you want to do. And then making, those convenient locations, whether it's a Walgreens or a Safeway or a CVS or whatever it may be, that seeing the visibility and more people in their communities getting vaccinated and seeing the positivity of that can really help those communities. So we can go to the next slide. Again, these are likely more powerful for an audience that is not conservative male, but these are important, credible voices talking about the safety of these vaccines. But again, I would also point to comments by former President Trump about himself getting vaccinated and Melania getting vaccinated and how he's worked on the vaccine and how safe and important it is. And those are voices that you can turn to. And we strongly encourage you to do that. And we can go to the next slide. One thing I just wanted to quickly point out was back earlier in late 2020, we looked at expanding diversity in clinical trials. This is a longstanding difficult issue between, medical scientific research and Black and Brown communities. There's a lot of mistrust for very good reason for past things that happened with this community where subjects were treated unethically, were infected with disease, not treated for diseases. And in order for us to get past some of that and work with these communities, the only thing that we can do is acknowledge those past wrongs, have open and honest conversations, and drive real change in underserved communities. And a big part of this has been driving what are the first ever industry principles on expanding diversity in clinical trials. This means both for COVID-19, but also more broadly. Diversity in clinical trials is critical because so many of these diseases disproportionately impact these communities. It's an important step for us to earn some of that trust back and have some of the systemic issues directly addressed that have taken place in our healthcare system. And, speaking directly to the access barriers that these communities face and talking very specifically about policy solutions and research to better address the health disparities. If there is one thing that we learned from COVID that just was emphasized more than anything else, it's that the level of inequity in our healthcare system disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities at a level that I don't think any of us could have anticipated. And if we don't take this opportunity to do something about it, then we're not doing what we should be doing and serving all communities and making sure that the healthcare system is robust and equitable for everyone. So, I think the other thing I would say before I end is all of the information I've presented, we're happy to share it with all of you. We're happy to follow up. You can get tons of information about our COVID vaccine responses, as well as our broader COVID-19 work as an industry on our website. And we're happy to share that with the organizers of the call so that you have it. But so it's PhRMA, PhRMA.org/coronavirus. And you can get all of this information, including some of the stuff Scott walked through and the number of clinical trials, the types of clinical trials that are underway, as well as a whole series of information about talking about vaccines, talking about therapeutics. And with that, I will stop talking. And I believe I'm turning it over to Dr. Tan.
Thank you, Priscilla, for that. And just a quick thumbs up from somebody that you all can hear me. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. If you could have the next slide, please. I'm going to actually just quickly skip next slide. Okay, this is what I'm going to try to cover, but there's been such great presentations from Scott and Priscilla that I'm actually going to use my slides to kind of just touch on a couple of more issues that might be of interest. And then I would love to just kind of move into a question and answer, because I think that's the best way for us to conduct and get you the most recent information. There's so much happening with COVID-19 vaccines. I think being able to kind of directly address the questions would be fantastic. There was already a question in the chat box that I quickly took care of. So I hope this is a way that we can make this go forward. Just next slide. I put this next slide up here because I just want to reiterate what Scott has already mentioned, is that there is a lot of safety in the safety profiles of our COVID-19 vaccines are excellent. And it's not just because of these phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials that were, especially the phase 3 trials that were massive and were well conducted and transparent, but also to reemphasize the preclinical research and development that went on before COVID-19 even became an issue. A lot of the reasons why we were able to move vaccines through the pipeline so quickly was because we do have prior experience with these vaccines, even with the mRNA platform, which everyone says, I know it's a new vaccine, first time it's actually being authorized for use with that platform. But you know what? We've had experience with it with MERS, with SARS. It is not a technology that we are not familiar with. And that's the reason why the research and development pipeline went so quickly. And then also to reiterate another point Priscilla made, which is this phase 4 at the very right-hand side, that following authorization and indeed licensure of a vaccine, surveillance of vaccine safety and efficacy does not stop. The FDA requires the innovators, the manufacturers, to continue to monitor not just for effectiveness of the vaccine through real-time data, but also for the surveillance for safety. And again, as Priscilla pointed out, 6 cases of thrombocytopenia in 6.8 million doses given. Your chances of being hit by lightning is 1 in a million. That's the same chance of this adverse event. But because of the fact that we put vaccine safety as utmost priority, the vaccine use was halted. And in fact, we had an emergency ACIP meeting on Friday, and we will have another one on Friday where I'm sure you're going to see some recommendations as to what needs to happen in order for that pause to be lifted. It's one of those risk-benefit analysis that I'm so delighted that we have all these experts looking at as well. So just to reiterate that using this slide. At the next slide, please. This just kind of summarizes why, again, the acceleration was possible. The R&D, as I said already, we had a lot of background on that. And what happened was a lot of those clinical trials, instead of the phase 1 happening sequentially with phase 2 and phase 3, they were kind of overlapped with immediate transparent feedback between the FDA and the manufacturers that allowed data as it came out from phase 1 clinical trials to be immediately fed into the design of the phase 2 trials and indeed the phase 3 trials, which then allowed the compression of that clinical trial process. So again, this is the reason why these vaccines have a hugely good safety profile and are also extremely efficacious, is because of all this work. Next slide, please. I'm now going to shift and talk a little bit more about what Priscilla has started talking about. How do we increase vaccine demand when we know there is existing vaccine confidence barriers with COVID-19 vaccines? A lot of the things that Priscilla has already mentioned. And I think one of the things I want to remind everybody is that vaccine hesitancy issues in the adult population has not been a strong problem. You know, you never got a lot of issues with people getting their pneumonia shot and concerns about that until the COVID-19 vaccine came about. So I think we're learning a lot as we go forward, but I think we can apply some of the knowledge we had from our pediatric populations to address some of the concerns with the adult population as well. If you take a look at the next slide, I just want to use this slide to point out that this was a survey that was done right before the vaccines were launched, sometime in the fall of last year. And I use this to essentially show you, when I show you some data now, that the concerns about why people do not get vaccinated are very similar to what they were back then. They have not changed much, as Priscilla has already shown us. And that the reasons why people would get a coronavirus vaccine, a COVID-19 vaccine, has not changed much either. Those motivations remain the same: protecting self, protecting family and people they care about. So if you take a look at the next slide, this is actually data that we got from the most recent current trends. This was a presentation made by Brittany Bach from CDC to a summit that I co-chaired. This presentation was just done last week. So this is the most recent survey data from the CDC. And some of the things they pointed out is that individuals who are seeking vaccine are getting vaccinated. 35% have already been fully vaccinated. 22% say they will continue to seek vaccination. The number of people who are going to refuse vaccinations has not shifted. That stays at 11% of the population. Priscilla highlighted some of those difficult populations. But what we can see also is that there is a remaining 30%, what CDC would like to call the movable middle. These are the fence sitters. These are the populations that were not previously eligible, but are now eligible effective today, right? Because that has just come out. So, and so those are the folks we can still move with your help and your messaging. And again, to do that, not to reiterate some of the talking points that Priscilla has already said, we need to continue to emphasize and build trust in the COVID-19 vaccines. using some of the talking points that we've just mentioned. Safety, extremely safe vaccines based on a lot of prior R&D. The vaccine was not rushed. Efficacy, tremendous efficacy, and as data continues to emerge, cross-reactivity against some of the variant strains that we're beginning to hear about. Again, we need to address with your help, especially in those rural populations, this risk perception that the side effect of the vaccine is far worse than the risk of getting COVID-19. And we actually have very wonderful coalitions on the ground that we are working with. And I really commend the state health departments working with these coalitions to actually to focus in on reaching these rural populations with like-minded people. We had one rural farmer say three of his family members got COVID and really suffered, and he's stepping up as a person to speak to, and these coalitions organize on-the-ground meetings to other farmers as to why they need to get vaccinated. So I think those are approaches we need to continue to address, this balance of risk of the vaccine versus risk of the disease. And then I think, as we all know, transmitting COVID-19 to family and friends is one of the reasons people have always said that they would get vaccinated. So next slide. I'm going to start wrapping up here and just point out CDC does have a vaccinate with confidence strategy that addresses all of these focal points that we have now covered in our conversation today. If you look at the next slide, this strategy has 3 pillars. And the first pillar is reinforcing trust. We talked about this. So this is on us. My group, IAC, and I'll show you some web pages later, does a lot of work here about sharing clear and accurate information to providers and to the public, as well as to policymakers, such as what I'm doing today, about building trust in the vaccine itself. Not just that, but also the person giving the vaccine, the healthcare provider, and then also in the system that continues to look for vaccine safety, reinforcing that trust, empowering the healthcare providers so that they can talk to their patients. They are the #1 reason why someone will get vaccinated, and we need to make sure that they have all the tools in their hands to address all those questions that are coming to them from their patients so that they can strongly recommend the vaccine to their patients. And then the third part, which is what you all are so important, is we want to engage the communities and the individuals that lead in those communities so that we can have a sustainable, inclusive access to vaccines that will result in collaboration and acceptance of the COVID-19 vaccine as we go forward. This means, as already mentioned by Priscilla, going to the ground, and as I said, talking to farmers, going to communities of color through their churches, through their community centers, through their leadership, people who trust them, the influencers, folks like you all who are the elected representatives. We need folks like you all to be out there, again, speaking to the safety and the effectiveness of this vaccine and that risk-benefit analysis. Next slide, please. I would be remiss to not give CDC credit for having thought this through. This is their strategy, and I want to point out that this strategy has sustainability beyond COVID-19 vaccines. Because COVID-19 is not going away, we're going to go to an endemic phase of this disease, and it's going to continue to circulate, and we're going to have to continue to vaccinate against COVID-19. But as we do that, I want to leave you all with one final message, which is on the next slide. We cannot forget all the other vaccines that we have to give our children and our adults, even as we wrestle with COVID-19. We have lost a lot of coverage rates in terms of the pediatric population and the adult population with our routine immunizations because of our dealing with this pandemic in so many different ways, in terms of social distancing, the lockdown, all of that has the focus on COVID-19 has distracted us from very important routine immunizations. So we need to keep this in mind. And as you all, as legislators, you need to remember that we need to keep in part legislation that will maintain these routine immunizations during COVID-19. These are essential preventive care services for children, for adolescents and adults, including pregnant women, that cannot be delayed anymore. Those rates have plummeted. We need to protect the individuals and the communities. We do not want COVID-19 plus an outbreak of something else like measles. And then we also have to remember that if we do have these collateral outbreaks of measles and mumps and pertussis, which is whooping cough, that is an additional burden to these already stressed healthcare systems as we're seeing this surge of COVID-19 happening right now. And then finally, this coming fall, don't forget flu. That's a respiratory illness. COVID plus flu is not good, not a happy camper. We do not want that. So something to kind of leave you all with as we as I wrap up here. And I thank you all for the work you all do and for the opportunity to speak to all of you all today. And I think hopefully we have some time to take questions, because I think that's a great way to get things across.
Okay, I will unmute. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Tan. Thank you, Priscilla and Scott. Very, very informative. I think we did ask people to put questions in the chat. Yep, great point. I don't know if anybody had questions or would like to ask a question.
The hand function.
Or you can use the hand function. Can you read that? Many seniors were vaccinated. Hold on, I feel like I'm going to go back out. Hold on. Many seniors were vaccinated back in January. Will they need a booster soon?
Would you like me to take that one first, Scott?
Please.
Priscilla? Okay.
Whoever knows the best.
Okay, I think there's a lot of discussion right now about booster, and we do know some of the manufacturers are already looking into booster vaccines, and in fact, have already started clinical trials on the booster. Again, pointing out the safety and efficacy trials that we're doing to protect our patients. But as the variants emerge, and as we find out more data about how long the immunity lasts because of vaccination, there is a strong likelihood that we will be thinking about booster vaccines. Right now, the data is not all in, which is, again, one of the things we always keep looking at. We need to look at the data. But my personal opinion is that coming into the fall and into next year, I think we'll have enough data about duration and immunity, as well as emergence of the variants in the United States, where we will be looking at whether a booster will be required, not just for seniors, but also for the entire population.
Okay. Okay. Lisa, you have your hand up?
Yes, as soon as I find the unmute button, sorry. You mentioned something interesting, Dr. Tan, about early childhood vaccines and kids falling behind and not getting their regular vaccines because of everything going on with COVID. Thoughts on how we sort of nip that in the bud and get kids caught up so that we don't sort of continue to slide backward on that?
Yeah, so one of the big reasons why we are so successful in the United States as compared to other countries with our pediatric immunization program is school entry requirements. We cannot lose those. Those are highly important. That plus the provider recommendation are the two reasons why our kids are so well vaccinated. We're over 90% for all our pediatric vaccines. That's amazing. That's why we don't have those outbreaks. Now, the problem is that we do have very loud voices on the other side who are not for vaccines. And they're they're being very smart almost, right? What they have done is they've stoked some of the fear regarding COVID-19 vaccines and mandates for that specific vaccine and broaden it to say, hey, we need to worry about the mandates for all vaccines. So we need to be very clear, and you all as legislators have this right in your doorstep right now, that legislation that prevents school entry requirements will hurt our public health system.
Okay.
Thank you.
We had a question in the chat. Hold on. As a nursing mother, I went and got the vaccine after talking through the options with my pediatrician and OBGYN. Very good. And she's heard that her infant may receive antibodies. Would there be any benefit to giving her toddler some pumped breast milk so she may receive antibodies too?
Wow, that's an excellent question. So this is all speculative. There's no data on this. So I'm going to speak as an immunologist and a scientist. So absolutely, the antibodies will transfer if you do that. To the extent that they will transfer, I cannot say how much is going to be effective. I think, clearly breastfeeding an infant has data showing that that's important. I don't know. We do not have any data with any of the other vaccines, either with flu, for example, with feeding a toddler who has a more advanced digestive system, where there is going to be some mucosal immunity against the actual antibodies themselves. So I can't speculate that it will be successful, but it's not likely to be harm.
Which is really all you don't want to happen, right? So it can't hurt, right? Like
exactly.
we often say that it can't hurt. So okay, I don't know if anybody else has their hand up. Lisa, is your hand still up? Or do you have another question? Okay, I see you shaking your head. All right, let me go this way because I'm on a little screen. Just, doing two things at once. I don't think anyone else has their hand up.
Serena,
Okay.
if I could.
You may do anything you want.
As an organization, NFWL is committed, Dr. Tan, to helping get the word out. We have almost 5,000 elected women in our organization, and we've also been working with the folks at the CDC on an immunization campaign for children going back to school. We've been getting all of there, and we forward all of that information. So as an organization, we're committed to helping this process.
Thank you so much. That is so important. And CDC, as you know, has a call to action, trying to make sure that we don't fall behind. The last thing we want to see is outbreaks of measles and whooping cough coupled with pandemic and COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. You know, here in New Jersey, we had in one of our communities, we had an outbreak of measles not too long ago, and it was because of that, because they, you know, and I'm not one to, you know, I'm very vocal about not mandating a vaccine. Like certain ones, absolutely, meningitis, you know, bacterial meningitis will kill a college student in you know 24 to 36 hours, right? Okay, yes, so that yes, you know, but mandating, like you need to, like Brenna made her point. She talked to her OBGYN and her pediatrician, and that's the decision she made. But certain vaccines that will hurt the entire community, that's a different point that needs to be made. That's a different, you know, different set of facts that need to be applied. So yes, we're very much looking forward to working with the CDC and making sure people get educated on what's right and what's right for them. I think there's another question in the chat. Hold on. Oh, nope, somebody had to leave. Well, thank you, Lisa, for coming.
I didn't put up my final two slides in the interest of having time for question and answer. So I just want to call out the website that's behind me as I lean over.
Oh, I see it. Very good. Immunize.org. It's important.
Yes, that's a great place for resources. If you want to come and you know, we have a whole bunch of things like all these are all the things we do on the ground with our coalitions. Recommend engaging your immunization coalitions if you have any questions on the ground, because they know what's happening in your states. So go there, come to our site. That's great. And, you know, we hopefully will be able to work with y'all to continue to push that information out.
Right, because you do hear people and say stuff, and Facebook and Twitter are many times our friend and many times just as detrimental with the information that gets put out there. So this is a good thing to have. I mean, somebody yesterday tweeted that her grandfather got the shot, you know, got both shots a month and a half ago, and then he had a stroke, and so it has to be COVID related. You know, yeah. So I think, you know, I'm going to leave it there. So it's just a matter of making sure people get educated and understand. And this is a great, thank you for that. Immunize.org. For those of you who didn't see Dr. Tan lean over. Immunize.org. So
virtual backgrounds have a great purpose sometimes.
Yes, that's excellent. So
Scott,
go ahead. Scott, go ahead.
Just going back, Jody, to your point, I think it's so important because as was talked about by all the speakers at this point, the reputation by people that you trust, and particularly all of you, women legislators around the country, have immense reputation and credibility as it relates to then speaking to the communities that they need to if we're going to get through this place. I see it in my own family, right? The female, as they speak versus what I spew out of my mouth usually comes with a lack of credibility, but my wife says that and everyone sort of jumps for joy, and they're right. So I think that fits very importantly to the way this will play out. And ultimately for us to get to a community of, a community of scale is going to be engagement by all of you. So we appreciate it. I think something with your point about having those facts at your fingertips, because there is so much rhetoric and hysteria and attribution based on facts. We want all of you empowered in the same way that we as an industry have been looking to get that out into more communities. So,
you know, and I think it's helpful because quite honestly, at least in New Jersey, as soon as you say, you know, educate yourself, look at you get accused of, you know, big pharma buying you. So, you know, if you have those facts at your fingertips, you can say, well, no, big pharma isn't buying me. Here's the information, read it, digest it, educate yourself. That's all I'm asking you to do is educate yourself. talk to your doctor. Oh, and you get all that, but it's good to have this information. It's good that this program happened and you shared the slide you had, and we'll be able to share it with our constituents, because I think you're right. I think when people hear it from people they trust, to just educate themselves and look it up themselves and read it and digest it. And if you have questions, certainly talk to your doctor and, but it's not because anybody's buying anybody off. So it's important. So
I can
thank you for
testify
this.
I was not bought off.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Dr. Tan. Neither was I. So, okay. Are there any other questions or anything else from anyone? Seeing and hearing none. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I am always pleased to have PhRMA as a resource, as I said earlier, and I'm glad that you all have this opportunity to connect with them. And so please feel free to reach out to us at NFWL for any questions or comments following this event. If you didn't think of something, if you need to know a little bit more about something, we have our wonderful PhRMA representative. She's right on there, Sharon. She's phenomenal, and she gets us any information we need. So we will be posting the materials to our website, and we'll follow up with an email with all the links and the resources that were mentioned in this call. So as we end, I hope you're all staying safe, and I look forward to connecting digitally. Actually, I look forward to connecting in person in the very near future. So thank you all, and hope to see you very soon.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dr. Tan.
You're welcome. Thank you.